The California sun shimmered over the pristine sidewalks of Rodeo Drive, casting golden reflections off luxury storefronts and polished window displays. It was a morning like any other in this upscale shopping district, busy, elegant, and humming with the muted sounds of high society commerce. Among the bustle of designer heels and tailored suits walked Claire Matthews, a woman who, at first glance, appeared to have taken a wrong turn into the world of wealth. At 45, Claire carried herself with quiet confidence. Her blonde hair, tied neatly in a ponytail, framed a face untouched by heavy makeup. She wore a plain white t-shirt tucked into soft gray joggers, her feet comfortable in white sneakers. There was no jewelry save for a simple gold band on her finger, and a delicate wristwatch she wore more for sentiment than status. In a crowd of couture and high fashion, she was markedly different, but she walked with her head high, unaffected by passing glances. Today wasn't about extravagance, it was about meaning. Claire had spent days searching for the right birthday gift for her husband, Robert Matthews, one of Los Angeles' most successful investors and a man who, despite his billions, appreciated thoughtfulness over price tags. She'd found the perfect gift, a vintage 1960s Chronomaster watch at a boutique called Elegance, renowned for its curated selection of luxury timepieces. Claire checked her watch. 10:30 a.m. She had 90 minutes before meeting Robert for lunch. More than enough time to secure the watch and have it wrapped. With a deep breath, she stepped up to the boutique's entrance, gazing at the elegantly dressed mannequins behind the crystal-clear glass. Inside, chandeliers sparkled above glass counters, and soft music played beneath the hum of hushed conversations. The moment she opened the heavy glass door, a chime rang delicately, signaling her arrival. The cool air-conditioned interior greeted her, laced with the unmistakable scent of expensive perfume and leather goods. She stepped inside, her gaze scanning the showroom until she found what she came for, a display of rare vintage watches behind a velvet-lined case. She approached the counter quietly, eyes drawn to the watch she'd researched. A rare timepiece with gold and steel elements, its value not only monetary but historical. The kind of item that whispered sophistication rather than shouted wealth. "May I help you?" a clipped voice interrupted her focus. Claire looked up to see a young saleswoman in a sharp black dress, her dark hair pulled back tightly. The woman's expression was cool, her eyes scanning Claire's attire with barely concealed skepticism. "Yes," Claire said calmly, "I'm interested in that Chronomaster watch in the case." The saleswoman blinked. "That particular item is $85,000. Claire nodded. "I know. I'd like to see it, please." There was a pause long enough to be insulting before the woman reluctantly retrieved a small silver key from behind the counter. With exaggerated care, she unlocked the glass and retrieved the watch, setting it on a velvet tray that she pushed toward Claire as though afraid she might lunge for it. "It's a limited edition," the saleswoman offered. "Only 5 were ever made." Claire smiled slightly, examining the timepiece with appreciation. "It's perfect," she said softly. "I'll take it." The woman's eyes widened. "You'll take it?" "Yes," Claire repeated. "I'd like to purchase it." The saleswoman leaned slightly over the counter, her voice suddenly oily. "Perhaps you'd like to discuss financing options." "That won't be necessary," Claire replied, her voice steady. Across the boutique, a man in a fitted navy suit and glossy dress shoes was observing the interaction. Marcus Devlin, the boutique's manager, prided himself on curating not just products, but clients. He had built Elegance's reputation on exclusivity, and the casually dressed woman examining their most expensive item triggered every red flag he'd learned to trust. He made his way over, the smile on his face practiced but devoid of warmth. "Is everything all right here, Veronica?" he asked the saleswoman, though his eyes were locked on Claire. "This customer," Veronica said with a faint edge, "is interested in the Chronomaster." Marcus turned fully toward Claire. "Madam, the Chronomaster is one of our most exclusive items. Perhaps Veronica could show you something more accessible." "I'm not browsing," Claire said, standing her ground. "I'd like to purchase the watch." Marcus and Veronica exchanged a brief look. Claire had seen it before, the silent agreement between staff who believed they were dealing with someone beneath their station. "Of course," Marcus said with forced civility. "However, we do require verification for such high-value purchases. A platinum card, bank letter, some demonstration of available funds. I'm sure you understand." Claire tilted her head slightly. "I don't usually carry those when I'm out for the day. My husband is meeting me shortly. We were planning to have lunch nearby." Marcus' smile became smug. "Of course, your husband. Perhaps when he arrives, we can revisit this conversation." Claire realized what he was implying, that she was fabricating a wealthy partner to gain credibility. She could feel the slow burn of indignation in her chest. "The watch is a surprise for him," she said. "I'd prefer to complete the purchase before he gets here. I'm afraid I can't authorize a transaction without proper verification," Marcus said, his tone growing sharper. "We have genuine customers waiting." He gestured subtly to a couple standing nearby, who quickly looked away, pretending not to have been eavesdropping. At that moment, a well-known actress entered the boutique, and suddenly Marcus transformed his attention, flipping entirely. "Ms. Reynolds, what an honor!" he exclaimed, abandoning Claire to fawn over the celebrity. Claire stood quietly, the insult compounding with each second. Veronica stepped closer, voice low. "Look, maybe you should come back later with your husband." Claire checked the time again. It was just past 11. Robert would arrive in 30 minutes. She could wait. Let him walk in and put Marcus in his place. But that wasn't who she was. She took a breath. "I'd still like to purchase the watch." Veronica scoffed. "I've worked here 5 years. I know a discount hunter when I see one. You're wasting everyone's time." Claire didn't respond. She didn't trust herself to. Her silence, however, didn't stop the stares. Around her, whispers grew. Customers, who had once been indifferent, now watched with amused curiosity. She had come for a gift. Instead, she was becoming a spectacle. And it was far from over. The elegant interior of elegance had turned cold, not by temperature, but by atmosphere. What should have been a quiet, meaningful shopping experience for Claire was now a gauntlet of humiliation. The watch still glimmered beneath the soft lighting, resting on its velvet pad, so close yet suddenly unreachable. Claire kept her posture straight, drawing from years of grace in the face of superficial judgment, but inside, a storm brewed. She had tried patience. She had been clear and composed. Yet, she was still being measured by the weight of her clothes rather than the content of her character. From the back of the boutique, Marcus Devlin returned, his demeanor hardened. His performative charm had vanished, replaced by a cold finality. The earlier smirk had faded into something sharper, decisive, and condescending. "Madam," he began, his voice lowered but no less aggressive, "I believe we've been more than accommodating." Claire's gaze didn't flinch. "I've told you clearly I want to purchase the watch." "Yes, but you've provided no means to demonstrate that you can actually afford it," Marcus replied, his eyes drifting deliberately down her outfit. "We've seen this before. People coming in, pretending they're buyers, touching merchandise, taking photos. All for their social media profiles, trying to live a life they don't have." The words stung, not because they were true, they weren't, but because they reflected a smallness of mind Claire had encountered far too often. A world too eager to categorize others based on surface detail. "I don't need to prove my worth to you," Claire said, her voice calm, but now edged with frost. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice further, just enough that those watching had to strain to hear. "Enough. I must insist that you leave the premises." Claire blinked, her composure momentarily slipping. "Excuse me." "You heard me," he said with authority, gesturing toward the front door. Either produce verification of funds or exit my store. We cater to a specific clientele, and you are disrupting the business environment." A heavy silence descended across the boutique. A few customers had stopped browsing entirely, pretending to examine displays as they listened. Two women stood near a jewelry case, exchanging whispers. One of them chuckled under her breath, not even attempting to hide the judgment in her expression. Claire's throat tightened, but she refused to look away. "This is ridiculous. I'm a paying customer." "No," Marcus said, taking a step closer. "You haven't paid for anything. Nor, frankly, do I believe you can." His hand hovered in the air as if daring her to argue, but Claire knew what would happen if she stayed. The scene would escalate. Her dignity was already under siege. She would not offer it up further for public dissection. The watch gleamed beside her, and touched. With a quiet breath, she straightened her shoulders, drawing from the very dignity they tried to deny her. "The way you've treated me," she said, her voice low, "says far more about you than it does about me." Marcus' smile turned cruel as he reached out, guiding her by the arm. "People like you don't belong here," he said under his breath. "Perhaps try the department stores downtown." The glass door swung open with a gentle chime as Claire stepped out. The sunlight, once warm and inviting, now felt harsh, revealing. Behind her, the door clicked shut with finality. She stood still for a moment, breathing in the open air, blinking against the sudden brightness. Her cheeks flushed not from shame, but from rage, carefully contained beneath her skin. Through the pristine boutique windows, she could see Marcus speaking with his staff, making some wry comment that drew laughter. Veronica was glancing out at her with a smug, satisfied smirk. Claire didn't cry. She didn't flinch. But her hands, balled into fists at her sides, trembled. She glanced at her watch. 11:40 a.m. Robert would be here in 20 minutes. For a fleeting moment, she imagined waiting standing right outside the boutique like a silent protest, then watching the look on Marcus' face when Robert arrived and walked in beside her. But no, that wasn't how Claire handled herself. She had never needed her husband's name to assert her presence. She wouldn't start now. If anything, Robert would be more furious than she was. And he would act not with anger, but with precision. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Are you all right?" Claire turned to find the actress from inside Ms. Reynolds now walking toward her, a small boutique bag in hand, her eyes apologetic. "I saw what happened in there," the woman said softly. "That was appalling." Claire forced a small smile, grateful for the kindness. "Thank you. I'm fine. Just surprised how quickly people make assumptions." The actress nodded. "It happens more often than it should. They judge you before you say a word." A sleek car pulled up, and a driver emerged to open the door for Ms. Reynolds. "Take care," she said, offering one last sympathetic look before slipping into the back seat. Claire stood alone again, feeling the tension begin to ebb. The emotional residue remained thick and heavy, but she refused to let it settle. Instead of waiting in front of the boutique like someone shamed, she turned and walked down the street. Just far enough to clear her head, just far enough not to give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing her wait. Meanwhile, inside a towering glass building in downtown LA, Robert Matthews was wrapping up his third meeting of the morning. At 48, he wore his success as comfortably as he wore his custom-tailored navy suit. Years of sharp decisions, savvy investments, and ruthless boardroom negotiations had built his name into a brand. But his private life, especially Claire, was the one place where simplicity reigned. As the elevator doors closed, Robert took a breath and checked his watch. 11:45. He was running slightly ahead of schedule. "Let's head to Elegance," he told his driver as he slid into the back of the black SUV, the windows tinted so deeply they reflected more than they revealed. He adjusted his blue silk tie, smoothed his suit jacket, and checked his reflection in the dark glass. He was looking forward to this lunch with Claire. Despite his empire, it was these quiet midday moments with her that grounded him. As the SUV pulled up in front of Elegance, Robert stepped out and scanned the sidewalk. He expected to see Claire waiting for him or browsing inside. She was nowhere in sight. Before he could step forward, a middle-aged woman approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Robert Matthews?" He turned, guarded but polite. "Yes. I just wanted you to know. Your wife was just asked to leave that store," she said quietly, glancing toward the boutique. "I was inside. The way they treated her. It was disgraceful." Robert's expression darkened. "Thank you for telling me." Robert's expression darkened. "Thank you for telling me." The woman gave a small nod before disappearing into the crowd. Robert remained still for a beat, then pulled out his phone. He considered calling Claire but instead texted his assistant. "Resh my to PM, something's come up." The reply came instantly. "Done. Everything all right?" Robert didn't reply. He didn't need to. His gaze shifted to the boutique's window. Inside, he saw a man in a sharp navy suit laughing with two staff members. Their posture was relaxed, smug. The tone in the room radiated smug self-satisfaction. Robert Matthews didn't believe in public scenes, but he did believe in accountability. And justice, when delivered quietly and precisely, made the biggest impact. The sun was nearing its midday apex, casting sharp shadows on Rodeo Drive. Claire walked slowly along the block, her mind still tangled in the knots of what had just transpired. Despite the warm weather, a chill clung to her skin, the kind of cold born not from temperature but from humiliation. She had entered Elegance with good intentions and quiet confidence. She had left stripped of both, not because she had faltered, but because others refused to look past a t-shirt and joggers. The sidewalk beneath her sneakers felt harder now. She passed boutique windows filled with luxury she could easily afford, but none of it mattered anymore. This had never been about status, it had been about meaning, about giving Robert something special. But the world, or at least Marcus de Vellen's version of it, saw only appearances. Claire had become invisible the moment she walked into Elegance, and it wasn't until she left that anyone noticed. She glanced at her watch again. 11:58. Robert would be there any minute. Claire sighed and turned back toward the boutique. She didn't want him to see her walking away, not like this. If anything, she wanted to spare him the fury she knew he'd feel. Robert was many things: measured, intelligent, strategic, but when it came to her, there was no negotiation. His protectiveness wasn't loud, it was precise. And that was what made it dangerous. Back at the curb, the black SUV arrived on schedule. The vehicle came to a smooth stop outside Elegance, its glossy exterior reflecting the clean lines of the boutique and the clouds rolling through the bright blue sky. The driver, James, stepped out and opened the door for Robert Matthews. Robert exited with effortless composure. At 48, his tailored navy suit emphasized a lean, athletic build honed from years of early morning workouts. His salt and pepper hair was combed neatly, and he adjusted his tie as he scanned the sidewalk. No sign of Claire. He glanced through the tall windows of the boutique. Inside, the atmosphere was relaxed, nearly celebratory. The manager, Marcus, was chatting with two saleswomen, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Robert watched them for only a few seconds, but it was enough. Something in their body language, in the casual way they leaned in to share whatever joke was passing between them, told him everything. Then, a voice pulled his attention away. "Mr. Matthews." Robert turned to find a woman in her 50s standing nearby. She seemed hesitant, but determined to speak. "Yes," he replied. "I recognized you from television. I just wanted to tell you." Your wife was mistreated in that store. She motioned subtly toward Elegance. She didn't do anything wrong. I was in there. It was shameful. Robert's jaw tightened, though his face remained composed. Thank you, he said with quiet intensity. That means a great deal. The woman gave a polite nod before disappearing into the crowd, leaving Robert standing in front of the boutique, hands at his sides, mind already moving at full speed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, quickly typing a message to his assistant. Reschedule my 2 p.m. Something's come up. Seconds later, done. Everything all right. Will be, Robert replied. He didn't need to say more. He looked through the window again, watching Marcus from a distance. The man laughed easily, unaware that the next few minutes would become a turning point not just in his day, but possibly in his entire career. Across the street, Claire was making her way back toward the boutique. She spotted Robert, her pace quickening. Her instinct was to smile, to make light of what had happened, but she saw something in his posture, something still, restrained. His back was straight, his jaw set, and though he hadn't seen her yet, Claire knew that look. It was the same look she'd seen him wear in boardrooms before he dismantled an entire corporate strategy with 2 questions and a raised eyebrow. She reached his side just as he stepped forward toward the door. I was just taking a walk, Claire said, brushing his arm with her hand. Robert looked at her, his gaze softening. How was your morning? Claire gave him a small, tight smile. Eventful. He studied her face. After 15 years of marriage, he knew every nuance, every flicker of her expression. She hadn't cried, but her eyes carried a sharpness, a tension just below the surface. Someone told me what happened inside, he said quietly. Claire hesitated. It's nothing, Robert. Just another case of judging a book by its cover. No, he replied, his voice quiet but firm. It's not nothing. No one treats you that way. She could hear it now, his business tone, calm and composed, yet threaded with the kind of resolve that made people listen. It was the same tone that made entire boardrooms fall silent. That tone wasn't for her. It was for whoever had crossed the line. Robert, she started, placing a gentle hand on his chest. But he was already walking. Inside Elegance, Marcus was still laughing, gesturing with amusement as he recounted Claire's visit to the saleswoman. Veronica smirked, glancing toward the counter where the chronomaster still sat, and touched. And then she said, I'll take it. Like she was buying a smoothie. Marcus scoffed. The door chimed softly as it opened. Marcus turned, his expression still relaxed until he saw who had just stepped inside. The store went still. Even the ambient music seemed to fade into the background as Robert Matthews walked through the doorway with calculated purpose. Those who didn't recognize him still felt the shift in the air. His presence was undeniable. Marcus took a step forward, the color draining slightly from his face. Good afternoon, sir, he began, his voice lighter now, nervous. Welcome to Elegance. How may we assist you today? Robert didn't respond immediately. He scanned the boutique, the luxurious displays, the staff, the atmosphere, then his eyes locked onto Marcus. I believe, he said, his voice controlled, you just ejected my wife from your establishment. Marcus froze. Behind Robert, Claire stepped into the boutique, quiet and poised. The staff's expression shifted instantly, recognition dawning like a wave of slow horror. Mr. Matthews, Marcus stammered, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Has there? Robert interrupted, eyes narrowing. From what I understand, you judged my wife based solely on her appearance. Refused her service, humiliated her, then physically escorted her out while making derogatory remarks. Silence fell across the boutique. Veronica looked down at the floor. A third staff member quietly stepped away from the counter and vanished toward the back. Robert didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He turned to Claire. Was this the watch you wanted? Claire nodded silently, pointing to the timepiece still on the velvet pad. Excellent choice, Robert said gently to her, then turned back to Marcus. His expression was no longer calm. It was surgical. I'd like to speak to the owner of this establishment, he said. Marcus swallowed. Mr. Goldstein is in New York this week, but I am the general manager. I have full authority. Perfect, Robert said, cutting him off. Then you'll have no problem explaining to Mr. Goldstein why elegance is about to face a very public relations nightmare. And why your most exclusive items will soon be stocked in stores I do business with instead. The boutique was so quiet, it felt like someone had cut the power. The low murmur of conversation that usually filled the air had vanished, replaced by an electric stillness that settled into every corner. Marcus Devlin stood frozen, his lips slightly parted, as the weight of Robert Matthews' words bore down on him. Veronica took a cautious step backward, instinctively distancing herself from the fallout. The third staff member had already disappeared into the back, as if their absence could erase their complicity. Robert remained composed, but his presence was searing. He looked at Marcus as if evaluating a failed investment, a calculation of cost, damage, and expendability. Mr. Matthews, Marcus finally croaked, forcing a thin smile. Please, let me explain. Had any of us known that Mrs. Matthews was your wife? Robert raised a hand, silencing him with a flick of his fingers. That's precisely the problem, he said coldly. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. You made an assumption based on clothing and demeanor. That's not service, that's prejudice. A ripple of reaction passed through the few customers still in the store, watching with bated breath. A woman near the back lowered the handbag she'd been inspecting. The young man at the sunglasses display took a cautious step away. The staff, once so animated, had become part of the furniture, silent and unmoving. Claire stood at Robert's side, her arms crossed lightly. She hadn't spoken since re-entering the store, but her silence said more than any words could. This wasn't vengeance. This was accountability. Robert gestured toward the display case. This was the item my wife came to purchase. And despite her clear intent, your staff dismissed her, questioned her ability to pay, and then threw her out. You had a chance to do the right thing. Instead, you performed for your assumptions. Marcus tried to interject again, but Robert didn't give him the opportunity. I want to speak with the owner. I told you he's in New York, Marcus replied, his voice weaker now. But I do have authority here. Good, Robert said, his voice softening into something far more dangerous. Then you can take full responsibility for what happens next. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and removed a silver business card. With deliberate care, he placed it on the counter in front of Marcus, who eyed it like a bomb about to go off. My investment group finalized a controlling stake in Goldstein Luxury Retail as of this morning. Paperwork just closed, Robert said, which means, technically, I'm your boss now. The silence broke like glass. Veronica gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the counter. His jaw moved, but no sound came out. I didn't know, one told me, Marcus stammered. No, Robert said. They wouldn't have. This wasn't about me walking in as an owner. I came here today as a husband, and you insulted my wife. Marcus swallowed hard, his bravado now completely gone. Mr. Matthews, please. There must be something I can do to make this right. There is, Robert replied. He looked to Claire. But the first step is apologizing. Not because she's my wife, but because she's a human being who deserved respect the moment she walked in. Marcus turned to Claire. His voice was shaky, his posture humbled. Mrs. Matthews, I sincerely apologize. My behavior was inexcusable. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive. Claire raised a hand, much like Robert had. Apologies don't mean much unless followed by change. Robert nodded, turning back to Marcus. That brings us to your options. Marcus's face paled even further. Effective immediately, Robert said, Elegance will implement a mandatory sensitivity and equity training program across all staff. It will include unconscious bias, customer service ethics, and behavior evaluation. Every employee will complete it, including management. And my wife Claire will be overseeing the program's development. Claire blinked, surprised, but said nothing. She understood the power of what Robert was offering. This wasn't about punishment alone, it was about systemic change. And in that, she saw his respect for her, not just as his partner, but as a woman with her own values and voice. Marcus nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes, absolutely. I will participate, gladly. Robert's gaze didn't soften. Your other option is resignation. Effective immediately. The choice is yours. There was a long pause. Marcus looked around the store, as if searching for an ally. But there was no help coming. The staff who had once smiled at his jokes now stared at the floor. The customers were watching with narrowed eyes. No one was going to speak for him now. I would appreciate the opportunity to stay, Marcus said at last. To improve, to learn, then we'll see what you learn, Robert said evenly. He turned to the display case and lifted the chronomaster himself. Let's complete the transaction. Marcus, with trembling hands, unlocked the register and began the process. The same watch he had refused to let Claire touch was now being sold to the very woman he had shoved out his door. Each keystroke on the boutique's polished terminal sounded louder than the last. Claire watched quietly. This was never what she'd wanted, but it was what had to happen. When the packaging was finally complete, Marcus offered the wrapped gift with both hands, head bowed slightly. Claire accepted it with calm dignity. As they turned to leave, the boutique erupted into whispers behind them. Some hushed, some gasped, but no one missed the message. Robert paused at the doorway, looking back once more. And Marcus, consider today your turning point, not your fall. Then he stepped out, holding the door for Claire. As the boutique's glass door closed behind them, Claire and Robert stepped into the sunlit street. The atmosphere outside felt lighter, sharper. Behind them, whispers stirred like wind in the branches of a tree. Employees, customers, and onlookers all grasped they had just witnessed something far more important than a shopping dispute. They had witnessed a shift. Claire held the elegantly wrapped watch box in her hands, the velvet ribbon soft against her fingers. She looked down at it for a moment, and a wry smile curved her lips. That was dramatic, she said lightly, glancing sideways at her husband. Robert, standing tall beside her in his perfectly tailored suit, gave her a measured look. Strictly necessary, he replied without missing a beat. They began walking toward their lunch reservation just down the block. His arms slid around her back in a familiar motion, steady, warm, grounding. Claire let out a long, slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since the moment she first stepped into elegance. Did you have to make the entire staff fear for their employment? She asked, half joking, half curious. Robert's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then he said, no, I didn't have to, but I had to make them think. The staff at Elegance were trained to cater to image, not integrity. And today, someone needed to remind them that character isn't something you wear. Claire nodded, the moment still echoing in her chest. I just didn't want to ruin the surprise. That was the whole point of going alone. I didn't want to show up with you and have them suddenly roll out the red carpet because they recognized you. It defeats the whole purpose. And you didn't, Robert said, his tone softening. You showed them exactly who you were on your own. You gave them a chance to rise above their assumptions. They failed. That's on them." She looked up at him, and for a second, they simply walked, shoulder to shoulder, without speaking. Lunch was at their favorite bistro, a cozy, sun-drenched restaurant tucked into a quiet corner of Rodeo Drive. The maître d' greeted them with warm familiarity and ushered them to their table immediately. No whispers, no stares. Just service real, respectful, sincere. They sat beneath a striped awning with a view of palm trees swaying in the breeze. Robert removed his jacket, draping it across the back of his chair, and Claire rested the watch box on the table between them. "I can't believe they actually had the nerve to escort you out," he said, shaking his head. "Physically, on Rodeo Drive." Claire smiled ruefully. "It wasn't even the worst part. It was the way he looked at me like I was interrupting something more important by just being there. Like I didn't belong because I didn't fit their aesthetic." Robert reached for her hand across the table and held it firmly. "You belong anywhere you choose to walk, Claire. That man doesn't get to decide your worth." She laced her fingers through his. "I know, but in that moment, it felt like I was 15 again. Like I was back in that thrift store being followed by the security guard just because I was wearing my cousin's hand-me-down jeans." Robert's expression darkened, but she squeezed his hand. "It's okay," she said. "I'm okay. I've spent my whole life learning how to carry myself with quiet strength. Today was just a reminder of why I had to learn that in the first place." Robert studied her for a moment. "You shouldn't have had to." "No," she agreed. "But if I hadn't, I wouldn't be the woman I am now." The one who stood there, looked that manager in the eye, and said, "I'd still like to purchase the watch." Robert gave a small, proud smile. That line will go down in legend. Their waiter approached, menus in hand, and after placing their order grilled salmon for Claire, filet mignon for Robert, they sat in companionable silence for a while. "So," Claire said finally, her voice light again, "I'm overseeing a training program now." Robert chuckled. "It was a bit spontaneous, I'll admit. But they need someone who understands both sides of the counter. Someone who knows what it feels like to be judged. And someone who isn't afraid to call it out." Claire leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Turn something terrible into something constructive. It's your superpower. You don't just win. You improve the game." He looked at her, eyes steady. "You make it worth improving." The food arrived, and they ate together, the tension of the morning slowly dissolving into the shared rhythm of conversation and laughter. The watch box remained in the center of the table, and touched but not forgotten. When the check came, Robert signed it with a flourish and set down his pen. "What should we do with the watch now? Should I pretend to be surprised next week when you give it to me?" Claire tilted her head thoughtfully. "No, I think it means more now than it ever did. You earned it, not just for your birthday but for today. For standing up when I didn't ask you to." Robert smiled, and for a moment, the power couple disappeared. They were just two people, in love, sharing a meal after an unexpected storm. As they stepped back onto the sidewalk, the boutique far behind them, Claire glanced up at the sky. "You know," she said, "the funny thing is, they sell luxury, but they don't understand value." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "They think value is something you can display like a handbag, or a car, or a watch. But the most valuable things in life," she turned to him, her eyes soft but sure. "Respect, dignity, compassion. You don't wear them, you show them." He nodded slowly. Spoken like someone who could teach a course on the subject. Claire grinned. "Maybe I will." As they walked down Rodeo Drive, the world around them hummed with its usual high-end pretense, but Claire's presence was different now, anchored, assured. Not because she'd been vindicated, but because she had never let herself be shaken from the truth of who she was. In the end, the watch was only a watch. But the story behind it, that was priceless. And as stories like this tend to do, it spread. Before sunset, everyone on Rodeo Drive had heard about the woman thrown out of elegance and the black SUV that arrived an hour later. About the billionaire who didn't raise his voice but raised the standard. But more importantly, they heard about Claire. The woman who walked out with dignity and walked back in with power.